Welcome to the Northern Bridge, where we bring you global stories through an Afro-Canadian lens. I'm your host, and today we're examining what might be the most significant shift in federal energy policy in years. Yesterday, Prime Minister Mark Carney met with Canada's premiers at a First Ministers meeting where Alberta Premier Danielle Smith executed a political masterstroke. In a remarkable turn of events, we witnessed the climate-focused Prime Minister essentially commit to fast-tracking oil pipelines, but with conditions that reveal the complex political chess game being played. This isn't just about energy policy, it's about how a savvy provincial premier can use economic logic to back a federal leader into a corner where saying no becomes politically impossible. Let's break down this masterclass in political strategy and what it means for all Canadians. Prime Minister Carney announced a new approach to what he calls nation-building projects. Here's what he promised: a new federal major project office to streamline approvals, maximum 2-year approval process for projects deemed in the national interest, one project, one review instead of multiple regulatory hurdles, fast-track treatment for projects that strengthen the economy and provide undeniable benefits to Canada. Sounds ambitious, right? But here's where it gets interesting and where the skepticism begins. First, Carney is creating yet another government office, more bureaucracy to solve bureaucracy problems. Meanwhile, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre has been promising 6-month approvals, not 2 years. Second, what exactly qualifies as a nation-building project? The criteria include projects that must have high priority for Indigenous leaders and drive clean growth potential. This creates multiple veto points that could still block projects indefinitely. This is where Alberta Premier Danielle Smith executed what can only be described as a political masterstroke. She didn't come to this meeting asking for favors or making demands. Instead, she presented a strategic proposal, a trap so logically bulletproof that even a climate-focused former central banker couldn't find a way to refuse it. Here's her strategic argument. Oil sands companies want to decarbonize their operations through carbon capture and potentially small modular nuclear reactors. But this costs $10–20 billion. How do you pay for that? You need revenue. How do you get revenue? You need pipeline access to Asian markets. Smith's proposal: build a 1 million barrel per day pipeline to the northwest BC coast. That generates $20 billion annually, enough to pay for the entire decarbonization project in 1 year. It's elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its logic. You can't fund environmental improvements without economic success, and you can't achieve economic success without market access. Checkmate. What made this a true checkmate moment was how Smith systematically eliminated every possible avenue of escape for Carney. She used his own environmental priorities as the foundation for her argument. Carney has spent years advocating for climate action in the financial sector. He wants decarbonization, but decarbonization costs money, and that money is sitting in Alberta's oil reserves. Smith essentially said, you want environmental projects? Here's how you pay for them. You want decarbonization? Our companies are ready to do it, but they need pipeline revenue to fund it. The trap was perfect. Carney couldn't oppose pipelines without opposing the very environmental improvements he claims to champion. He couldn't reject the economics without looking fiscally irresponsible. He was completely cornered. When pressed by reporters about fast-tracking oil pipelines, Carney was completely trapped. He couldn't say no without undermining everything he'd just promised about nation-building projects and economic development. Here's what a cornered prime minister sounds like. There's real potential there. If further developed, the federal government will look to advance it. Notice the language. He's talking about decarbonized barrels and projects within a broader framework. This is what political surrender sounds like when you're trying to save face. He's been outmaneuvered and he knows it. The term decarbonized oil might sound like an oxymoron, but it simply means reducing emissions in the extraction and processing. The oil itself is the same. It's the production process that's cleaner. What's remarkable about this meeting is the unprecedented unity among premiers. Conservative premiers like Smith and Scott Moe NDP Premier Wab Kinew from Saskatchewan, pro-Liberal Doug Ford from Ontario, and even the new Liberal Premier of New Brunswick all supported the energy corridor proposal. When premiers across party lines tell the federal government we need energy pipelines, that's not partisan politics. That's economic reality. Carney promised 2-year maximum approvals for national interest projects. Is this progress? Compared to current timelines that can stretch over a decade, yes. Compared to what Canadians actually need and what other jurisdictions offer, it's still glacial. Consider this, while Canada debates 2-year approvals, our competitors are moving much faster. The longer we take to develop our resources, the more market share we lose to countries with less stringent environmental standards. Premier Smith made another crucial point. If government has to build the pipeline, the process has failed. Private sector projects stay on budget and timeline because investors have skin in the game. Government projects consistently go over budget because there's no real accountability for cost overruns. This aligns perfectly with conservative economic philosophy. Create conditions where private investors want to build projects rather than having government build them. Smith's closing comment wasn't just diplomatic pleasantries, it was putting Carney on notice. She essentially said, "We've backed you into this corner, now we're watching to see if you'll actually follow through." The premiers are watching to see if he follows through on commitments or if this was just another Ottawa talking shop. If Carney doesn't deliver, these cooperative premiers could quickly become his biggest political nightmare. Smith has him exactly where she wants him. Throughout this discussion, one major barrier remains largely unaddressed: Bill C-69, often called the No More Pipelines Act by critics. This legislation created the current regulatory maze that Carney now promises to streamline. Can you really implement one project, one review, while C-69 remains in place? The legislation specifically requires multiple layers of review, including Indigenous consultation, environmental assessment, and provincial coordination. Either Carney plans to significantly amend C-69, or his streamlining promises will hit a regulatory wall. Carney promised one project, one review, but what does this actually mean when projects still need approval from Indigenous communities, provincial governments, federal departments, environmental assessment panels? Unless all these groups participate in a single coordinated review process, we're still looking at multiple approval stages. The devil will be in the implementation details. The economic argument for pipeline access to Asian markets is compelling. Asian economies are growing, they need energy, and they're willing to pay premium prices for reliable supplies. Currently, Canadian oil trades at a discount because we lack transportation options. Pipeline access to Tidewater changes that equation entirely, generating billions in additional revenue that can fund both public services and environmental improvements. This meeting revealed something important about Canadian federalism. When premiers across party lines unite behind economic development, federal governments ignore them at their peril. Carney's willingness to engage seriously with these proposals suggests he understands the political reality. You can't maintain national unity while blocking economic development that benefits multiple provinces. Here's the environmental irony. Blocking Canadian pipeline development doesn't reduce global oil consumption. It just means that oil comes from countries with lower environmental standards and less democratic governance. Canadian oil produced with carbon capture technology and transported through modern, monitored pipelines is arguably more environmentally responsible than alternatives from less regulated jurisdictions. The coming months will test whether this meeting was substance or theater. Key indicators to watch. Will the promised federal major project office actually streamline approvals? Will one project, one review become reality or remain a slogan? Will Indigenous consultation requirements slow progress despite good intentions? Can private sector proponents emerge if regulatory certainty improves? For Carney, this represents a significant political risk. Environmental advocates may see pipeline approvals as betraying climate commitments, but blocking economically viable projects could alienate premiers and voters who want jobs and prosperity. Smith's strategic trap offers political cover. frame pipeline development as funding environmental improvements rather than opposing them. Today's First Ministers' meeting wasn't just a policy discussion, it was a masterclass in political strategy. Danielle Smith systematically cornered Prime Minister Carney using his own environmental priorities against him, creating a situation where refusing pipeline development would mean rejecting the very climate improvements he claims to champion. The checkmate wasn't really a negotiation. It was a political trap perfectly executed. Smith used economic logic as a weapon, leaving Carney with no viable path to refuse without looking hypocritical or fiscally irresponsible. Premier Smith played her hand brilliantly, using Carney's own environmental priorities to justify pipeline development. Carney, trapped by sound economic logic, had little choice but to engage seriously with the proposal. The next few months will determine whether this was a genuine breakthrough or just another round of federal promises that fade when premiers return home. At the Northern Bridge, we'll continue monitoring whether words become action and whether Canada can finally build the energy infrastructure our economy needs. What do you think about this political checkmate? Can Canada balance environmental goals with economic development, or are we destined for continued gridlock? Let us know in the comments. If you found this analysis valuable, please subscribe to our channel and share this video with others who want to understand the real dynamics shaping Canadian energy policy. Thank you for watching. Until next time, this is the Northern Bridge, Global Stories, Afro-Canadian Lens.